Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Flint Walling virtual training event. Today is the presentation's titled House of Resistance. I see we still have people coming in, so just a minute or two up front here. And as a reminder, if you like today's presentation, of course you haven't sat through it yet, but if you like the way that we're doing this pump sizing for centrifugal pumps, if this is something that kind of turns a light bulb on for you, keep in mind and go back to our website where the schedule's located. I believe it's late February or March, sometime in that time frame. We'll be launching another new presentation, which will be entitled House of Resistance for Subs. So we're going to talk about centrifugal pumps and how to size those up. This is kind of aimed at a small residential home and then also some irrigation systems. So if any of you are out there involved in irrigation, this will be hopefully a home run for you. So next week, or I mean in the latter part of February, March, there'll be a presentation called House of Resistance for Subs. And then next week, we're shifting gears a little bit. So next week's presentation is going to be talking about how to test a submersible pump motor using multimeters. And so if that's something that you'd be interested in, we're going to talk to you about how you can tell if a motor is grounded, shorted, open winding, so on and so forth. So with that said, we're going to go ahead and get started with today's presentation. I will tell you that this will not run the full hour. Historically, it hasn't, at least. But we'll run, probably 45 minutes or 50 minutes or so. Also, attached on your dashboards, if you'll look at your dashboards, and I'm not necessarily saying to have to do this now, but I've attached a couple of handouts. So that tab marked handouts on your dashboard will have a couple of PDF downloads in there that you can download as a resource for today's presentation. They also put a survey up so that if you feel kind enough to give us some input, we would love to have you also take a minute or two to fill that survey out. All right, with all that said, let's go ahead and get started with the House of Resistance. Some people ask, just by the title, what are you even talking about? Really, it's a new model. I say it's a new model. This came about probably at this point, maybe 8-9 years ago. But think of it as a pump sizing tool. I've, in my career, have had the opportunity to travel this vast country, and I've done literally hundreds and hundreds of seminars across the country, and particularly in irrigation. And one of the things that I find, and this is not I'm not speaking down to anybody, but one of the things that I find, particularly in irrigation, is there seems to be a bit of a weakness when it comes to sizing pumps. There seems to be people that just want to shy completely away from it, or they're just confused, whatever. But today we're going to clear that all up, and in so doing, I'm going to role play with you. We had some contractors come up to our factory a few years back, like I said, a few years back, and I'm sitting at dinner with the contractors the night before our training, irrigation guys, and one of the irrigation guys looked at me and said, "Mr. Painter, you going to teach us how to size pumps tomorrow?" And I said, "Yes, sir, that's part of the plan. Why'd you ask?" He says, "Well, good luck." I asked him, I said, "Well, why do you say it that way?" He said, "Well, I've been to your competitors on 3 occasions, and on 3 occasions they've talked to us about how to size pumps, and I could no more size a pump today than the man in the moon." So when we look at the House of Resistance, let's just play a little pretend here to begin with. Let's just suppose that you had a system out there that required a flow rate of 15 gallons a minute. And I'm going to teach you here in a little while how we come up with that number anyway. But let's just imagine that you have a house or a system out there that requires 15 gallons per minute of water flow rate, and you want that to be at 50 pounds of pressure, all right? So I came into this classroom and stood in front of these contractors, and I said, "I got a question for you. If you want 15 gallons per minute and 50 psi, here's my question. Where do you want that? Where do you want that kind of flow, and where do you want that type of pressure? Do you want it right here where the pump's located, or do you want it, wherever that zone may be that has that kind of high demand? Where do you want it? Do you want it at the pump, or you want it at the zone? Of course, everybody says, hey, we want it out there at that zone where we need that water. That's where we want that 15 gallon per minute and that 50 PSI. I could care less what it's coming out of the pump at, as long as I have that flow rate and that pressure at that zone. So I think if we can all understand this very basic concept, many times a pump's not going to be located right next to wherever that demand for water may be, or wherever that highest demand for water may be. It may not be located right next to that. And so in order for that pump that's sitting over there on the left-hand side of your screen to get that flow rate and that pressure to that zone over on the right-hand side of your screen, that pump has to overcome resistance. That has to overcome resistance. And so that's why we've got this little thing we call house of resistance, all right? House of resistance. And again, it's just a small house. As you can see, there's only 4 rooms in this thing. But it's going to be an easy to use, easy to understand pump sizing tool for you. Let me explain this to you, how this works, okay? If you called me up tomorrow, next week, next month, and you said, hey, Mr. Painter, could you help me size this pump? Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to help you size a pump, but I'm going to tell you right out front, there's going to be 5 things that I want to know. So in sizing a pump, there's 5 things you need to know. Not 10, not 11, just 5. Here they are. So as these come up on your screen, you can see that at the top we have gallons per minute. That's going to be expressed in GPM. Whoops, sorry about that. Pressures right below that, expressed in PSI. And then following pressure is lift, elevation, and friction loss. Now, when we look at these 5 things, I want to start at the top, gallons per minute. Okay, it's not inconceivable by any stretch that certainly an irrigation system could be made up of multiple zones, right? So there's going to be different zones that come on at different times during the course of the irrigation system making its rounds. Nor is it inconceivable that some of those zones, when they're up and running, they may require more water than, say, the other zones. So I've tried to make this in very, very easy to understand terms. Let's just assume that each of those rotors that you see up there in zones 1, 2, and 3, let's just suppose they require a flow rate of 3 gallons per minute each, all right? So 3 gallons per minute each. That means zone 1 over there, when it's up and running, we total that up, that's going to require a flow rate of 12 gallons per minute. Zone 2, top right over there, there's 5 rotors in that zone, and at 3 gallons per minute, that's going to make that zone require 15 gallons per minute every time it's up and running. And of course, that little zone down in the center, that's just got the 3 rotors, and so 9 gallons per minute. But an irrigation system can look similar to this. Various zones requiring various flow rates. And so when it comes to gallons per minute, now I don't care whether we're sizing it for a irrigation system or we're sizing it for a house. You want to know how much water a house needs? Go count up all the fixtures. I mean, every one of them. And add those all up. The flow rate of that pump should equal the number of that count in fixtures of the house. But back to this irrigation system here. You always want to size a pump for whatever's going to be the peak flow rate required, or the peak gallon per minute required. So in this case, obviously, when zone 2 is up and running, it requires 15 gallons per minute. And so you want to size your pump to whatever your peak demand for water will be. Because if we size this pump to zone 1 and only put a 12 gallon per minute pump out here, when zone 2 come up and running and it wants 15 and it doesn't get it, then that zone's going to starve for water, obviously, and you're not going to get the adequate coverage that you're looking for. So again, always size these pumps for the highest flow rate, peak flow rate. Second thing that we talked about was pressure. I've stood in front of a lot of contractors over the years, and I'll ask, if that 15 gallon a minute that we just talked about, how much pressure would you want when I get that 15-gallon minute to you, and they kind of just look at me. They don't have a response. And, I throw this up there. I say, well, if I can give you that 50 PSI, you're going to be happy with that. And of course, everybody's head's shaking up and down. Yeah, if you're going to give me that 15-gallon minute and that 50 PSI at that zone 2, then yes, I'll take that. I don't care what the pressure is, right? You can have 40 pounds or 30 pounds or 60 pounds. But when sizing a pump, it's kind of good to know going in what kind of pressure you want to produce with that pump. So you want to catch all that on the front side. So that's the pressure, all right? When we talk about lift, lift is basically, a lot of these centrifugal pumps are in many applications. They're going to be required to lift water before they can actually pump it. So, it could be a well that they're lifting water out of. It could be a buried cistern or an underground tank of some type that they're lifting water out of. Here in this case, we've got a pump sitting along the shoreline of a lake here. And so it's basically going to have to lift water up out of that lake before it can send it off onto the irrigation system. And so when we talk about lift is, just imagine an imaginary line coming out from the suction or the inlet of that pump. So an imaginary line comes out across here. The question and the distance on lift, and it's measured in feet, is how far is it from that imaginary line down to the water source right here, right there? How much is that? That's measured in feet. And that's going to be called lift, okay? That's measured in feet. Now, I had a guy call me out in classroom one day. He said, well, wait a minute, Mr. Painter, did you say to measure from an imaginary line coming out of that suction portion of that pump just down to the water source and stop there? I said, yeah, that's exactly what I said. He goes, but I don't understand why you would stop there, because I have a foot valve that's connected onto that pipe, and it can set several feet below the top of that water source, and that's where the water is going to come into that suction pipe, is down there where your red cursor's at on that foot valve. So why would you not measure that entire distance there? And no, we're not going to measure that. I don't care what's below the water level there, okay? And here's how we explain that. I said, look, the distance that I'm interested in is just down to the water source. And I took a glass and I said, sir, if I fill this glass all the way up to the top with water, and then I drop a straw down in that glass of water, I got a question. He said, what's that? And I said, where's the water level inside that straw? And he said, well, that's easy. The water level inside the straw is at the same level it is inside that glass. I said, you are absolutely right. So when you take that suction line and you drop that down into that lake, that water is going to come through that foot valve, and it's going to start to fill that suction line up to the level it's at, on the outside in the lake, just like on this straw. And when you put your lips on the top of that straw, you're only having to lift that water that short distance because it's already that far up in the straw. And so that's why when we're measuring lift, I'm only concerned about going down to the water source, not wherever your foot valve or your suction pipe may end up below that. So there are several applications that you can have lift involved in a irrigation pump. Obviously, a well, if you're pulling water up out of a well, there'll be some lift involved there. We mentioned these underground tanks, these buried underground tanks or cisterns. Sometimes those are collecting water for irrigation. And so if your pump's sitting up above on the ground, then it's got to lift some water up out of that tank. So there'll be a small amount of lift involved there. And just like we talked about a few minutes ago, sitting on the side of a deck or a dock and pulling out of a lake may only be a few feet, but it's part of that resistance that pump has to overcome in order to get that water to the zone where you want it. And it's always just a vertical distance. I don't care about horizontal. It's just a vertical distance only. There will be applications where there'd be no lift at all. And we run into these occasionally. These pumps are actually put on a city water supply, and they're just used as a booster pump to boost pressure out into the irrigation system. In that case, you've got water being supplied to the pump under pressure, just like it is to your kitchen faucet. So the pump doesn't have to lift anything. It simply has to boost it. There are parts of the country, I won't spend much time on this, but in the bottom photo there, these are above ground reservoirs or large storage tanks. There's parts of the country where these are more common, obviously, than other parts. But that's all these are above ground storage tanks. And they'll set a centrifugal pump down at the base of these tanks. And so that it's feed water, the water that it gets, gravity flows out of that tank right into the pump. Again, there's no lift involved. And so there will be the occasion where you have lift, and there may be the occasion where you have no lift at all. When we talk about that fourth of the 5 items, elevation, it's very, very similar in lift in many ways. It's a vertical measurement. And basically what we're asking there is, does this pump have to overcome a terrain change? In other words, does it have to pump uphill? Is there elevation involved? Because if there is, this is all part of that resistance that pump has to overcome. And so again, when we talk about elevation, it's a vertical distance. I guess at the very best, at very best or very least, take a educated guess. Is it 50 feet, 25 feet, however high you may think that would be. But I would not disregard it, again, because it's part of that resistance that pump has to overcome. They make a phone app today for damn near everything, right? I mean, I really believe they do. And my wife has an app she'd put on my phone, and I'll keep that confidential, at least the name of it, but it measures my steps, basically, and she's able to track it from her phone. So it's like being on a leash. She'll tell me whether I got my steps in or not, and so I've looked at this thing on occasion. And the other thing I noticed that this tells me is it not only tells me how many steps I took or how far I went, but if I went up a hill, it'll tell me how high I went in elevation. So there's apps out there that I could set at this pump and walk up there to the top of the hill where that zone's at, look down at the app. It's going to tell me that I've inclined, 15 feet or whatever. But that's a number it's easy to get. Elevation, that's what we're talking about is, does that pump have to pump uphill? There are other occasions where there'd be no elevation at all, right? This is kind of like Northeast Indiana where I live. We are flat as a daggone pancake. It's probably the reason why we've had wind chills today at 20 below zero, because there's nothing to stop the wind. I had a dog run away from home when I was 9 years old, and 3 days later I could still look out there and see the guy. I mean, he was way, way out there. But anyway, there's times we're flat, okay? We have little, if any, elevation whatsoever. So there'll be times where, just like lift, if you're on a municipal water, there's no lift. If you're on flat ground like we see here, then there'll be times you have no elevation. All right, then that last of the 5, well, I guess just before we get to that slide again, lift and elevation are vertical measurements. They're measured in feet, and they're from imaginary lines coming off the inlet or the suction of this pump down to the water source and out the discharge of this pump to the highest level in your system, okay? The last of the 5 things are called friction, all right? Basically, the pretty fundamental illustration up on the screen. Obviously, we know that the guy that's going to get down the hill the fastest is obviously the one that will experience the least amount of friction. And when we look at a pumping system, all a pump's trying to do is move water through itself to wherever you want it as smoothly and as efficiently as possible. So that said, anytime 2 surfaces move past one another, there will always, not maybe, there will always be some friction involved. And so obviously we've got 2 surfaces moving past, socks on grass and skis on snow, right? 2 surfaces. And obviously the efficient one is the one on skis. Olympic swimmers, believe it or not, male swimmers at least, I've been told they've shaved their body from head to toe. They completely shaved their body. Again, you've got 2 surfaces moving past one another. You've got this swimmer going through the water. So in that level of swimming, what they're trying to do is they say they're trying to minimize drag. Well, what they call drag, we call friction, right? So that's what we're basically talking about. And so when we're looking at this pump, as it's trying to get that 15 gallon a minute and that 50 pounds of pressure out there to that zone where you want it, you've got 2 surfaces moving past one another, right? You've got water moving through the inside diameter of a piece of pipe, and it's rubbing along the side walls of that pipe. So here's how we determine friction. Three things, all right? Three things that you'll want to know to determine how much friction. I'm going to show you how we determine it in just a second. But the three things you want to know is A, water flow, gallons per minute. Well, we know that, right? We just come up on the 15 gallons per minute. That's what we're going to start off with anyway. And then I want to know what size pipe are you running that 15 gallons per minute through? Is it, 2 inch, inch and a half, inch and a quarter? What size pipe? And then the other thing I'm interested in is what is the length? How much of that pipe do you got? You got, a couple 100 feet, whatever that is. I'm not going to get all wrapped up with T's and elbows and all the various fittings that may be in that system because of this. You're going to find out here in a minute or two that of those 5 things that we're talking about right now, the size of pump, friction really is, it's part of that resistance, so I'm never going to disregard it. But at the same time, it typically has the least amount of influence over which pump I select. So, for example, smaller the pipe, the greater that friction is going to be. The longer the pipe, the greater that friction is going to be. And the more water you try to shove through it, right, the more friction you're going to experience. And so the opposite of every one of these would also hold true. You go with a larger diameter pipe, you reduce that amount of friction. So here's those 5 things. And if you look at this house, every one of these 5 things has a place in our house, all right? So you can see there's a room for pressure, one for lift and elevation, and one for friction. So let me show you how to work this house of resistance now that we've identified these 5 elements here. So let's just, essentially, we're going to build a house and we're going to size a pump. So here we go. We just talked about a few minutes ago when we first got started that when we look at this particular irrigation system here, we need to size it to zone 2 because that's the zone that requires the most water. So 15 gallons per minute is what we're going to want to size that pump for. So that said, I'm going to put 15 up there in that little chimney area. So I don't want that number going anywhere, so I'm just going to keep it up there and keep it safe, all right? Next question, how much pressure do you want? Well, again, just for sake of discussion, and as we talked about just a few minutes ago, I got all these head nods, hey, 50 pounds of pressure. Again, I don't care what the pressure is. It can be 40, and it can be anything, but I want to know what you want before we size this pump. So for now, we're going to go ahead and run with that 50 PSI. Boom, I'm going to put that in the pressure room. Now let's move on to the third one here. And then on this particular job, I'm going to ask a question. Do you have any lift involved? You say, yeah, I've got a little bit. And I said, well, no, I don't want to know what a little, tell me what is a little bit, all right? I mean, will you actually measure that? And the guy comes back and he says, all right, he said, I've got 5 feet of lift. I said, all right, well, that's all I wanted to know. And so I'm going to drop 5 feet in my lift room. And now you kind of see where we're going with this. We're building this house up room by room, but the next one I'm going to ask about is obviously the elevation. And we talked about that elevation is kind of similar to lift in as much as it's a vertical measurement, right? And so, I'm asking, what's the highest you got to go uphill in elevation in this particular zone? And if the guy comes back, he says 25 feet. That could be 125 feet. That can be any whatever that number is, right? But that's what we're trying to capture here. In this case, he said it was 25 feet. So I'm going to go ahead and put 25 feet down here in this elevation room. Now this last one here is called friction, all right? And we talked about a few minutes ago, there's 3 things you need to know in order to determine how much friction you're going to have in your house, all right, in your house of resistance. And so the 3 things were flow rate. Well, we know that. It's 15 gallons a minute. The other 2 things, if you recall, was pipe size and length of pipe, all right? So we know we've got 15 gallons per minute. So I want to know what size pipe you're running. The guy says, I'm going to run 1.5 inch PVC. All right, I'll run with 1.5 inch PVC. By the way, how much of that do you have? He says, I got 200 feet of it. All right, so there's our 3 items, right? There's the 3 things that we need to use to determine friction loss. And we use a chart to determine friction loss. And this is what a chart looks like. Now, I'm going to tell you, these friction loss charts are a dime a dozen. Flint & Walling's got them in their pump catalogs. I think most of our competitors have them. I know Plastic Pipe people, they have them in their catalogs. All these irrigation fixture people, they all have them. Friction loss charts are easy to find, but here's one thing I'm going to caution you on, and this is also going to be those handouts that I put on that dashboard for you. All your notes are in those handouts, folks, so you'll have this to go back. But I want you to look for the friction loss chart where the values that are expressed out here in this chart, those values that populate this chart, it'll say right up here at the top, it'll say values expressed in feet, not pressure, feet, all right? Because we're measuring elevation in feet, we're measuring lift in feet, might as well go ahead and measure friction loss in feet. So over on the left-hand side, it's a column that indicates flow rate. Well, we all indicated a minute or two ago that we wanted 15 gallon per minute. So we'll put a finger over here on 15 gallon per minute. Then if I scroll across the top of this chart, it says pipe size, and it varies, right? From 3/4 to 1 inch, so on and so forth. Well, there's my 1.5 inches. And so if I come down from 1.5 inches and I come over from 15 gallon per minute, I intersect in a box. And again, all the values that are expressed out here in this chart are expressed in feet. And so when I look at that box, I see 1.53 feet. That's the number I'm looking for. Now, at the bottom of the chart, it says note. These values are per 100 feet of pipe. And so how much pipe did we have? Well, we had 200 feet. And so what I'm doing, and I'm just sharing with you how I think and how I look at this. If you want to look at it the same way, I encourage you to do it. But I look at that 1.53 and I just call that 1.5 feet. And that's per 100 feet. And so if I've got 200 feet, I'm just going to double that 1.5 feet and make it 3. I hope that came across clearly. And I'm going to drop that 3 down there in my friction room down there. All right. So there we go. We've got the house built. Oh God, I hope I got everybody here. Okay, I hit part of the keypad on my phone and had a panic attack there. Hopefully I still got you. If not, I'll be talking to my computer for the next half hour. But here we go. We've got this house all built up, all right? Now, there is one fly in the ointment. And I kind of like to think of it at least as reverse psychology. If I'm in classroom, I look at the class and I'll say, okay, here's where I'm going to lose you. What do you mean? Ah, yep, you're going to fall overboard now. What are you talking about? And so, hopefully, I haven't lost anybody up to this point. But if you look at this house, we've got lift and we've got elevation and we've got friction, and all three of those are measured in feet, like we see on the house here. So the fly in the ointment is this guy up here, this pressure. All right, it's in PSI, and everybody knows what PSI stands for. But my house, I want to make in feet, and so there's a formula that's used, and again, it's part of the handout that's attached on your dashboards. There's a formula that's used, and here's the formula. You take that pressure and you want to convert it to feet. All right, then you take the pressure, whatever it is. In this case, it happens to be 50, and you're going to multiply that times 2.31. Now, that's not a Dan Painter formula or a Flint & Walling formula. This is an industry standard formula for converting pressure to feet. And so you multiply that pressure times 2.31. Well, in that case, the resulting number is 116 feet. And so now we've got the house complete. Everything's built up here, right? I do want to talk to you just for a second. I think this is the next slide coming up. Basically, what we're going to do is we're going to add all those feet up in the house. So you can see here, pressure has a big influence on what pump we're going to select, whereas friction loss, not so much. It's got some influence, but certainly not like pressure has. So that's a key thing to dial in on there. You want to make sure you're shooting for the right pressure. So I add all those feet up, and I come up with 149 feet in my house. So now I'm going to tell y'all something. Right here is exactly where pump companies have been trying to get you to for decades, but they've been teaching it in a language that we never understood very well. So these are the two numbers, that 15 gallon per minute and that 149 feet, because now you can go to any pump performance curve and you can make a pump selection if you have those two numbers. So let's look at this pump performance curve real quick. On the left-hand side, there it is. It's feet. And it goes, in this case, with this curve, it goes from 250 down to 0. And then down along the bottom is gallons per minute. And again, with this particular chart, it goes from 0 all the way out to 60 gallons per minute. So what did we say? We said we had 149 feet. All right, let's put a finger right there about where we would think 149 feet would be. Obviously just shy of that 150. Then we come down to the bottom and we want to put another finger at where the 15 gallons per minute is going to be. And of course, that's obviously dead center between 10 and 20. And so just like the friction loss chart, you're going to come over from the feet and you're going to come up from the gallons per minute and you're going to intersect there. And lo and behold, right there is a line that runs right through that intersection. There it is. That's the pump we're going to use. And so that particular pump would be a 2-horse, 2-stage centrifugal pump. That's how easy it is to size a pump using the house of resistance. Now we're going to go through this one more time, but we're going to go through it a lot quicker. This time, let's say that our peak zone has 8 rotors in it. All right, so there's 8. Again, whatever that peak zone is, that's the one you want to put in your chimney. That's the one you want to size your pump to. So we're going to have 24 gallons per minute with this new zone here. All right, so 24 goes up there. And here's my remaining 4 questions on the screen right now, and that's, how much pressure do you want? The guy says, well, this time I'm going to take 60 psi. Again, whatever that pressure is, that's fine. Let's just calculate for what they're whatever they want. If they want 65 or 70 or 40, whatever. We might as well go ahead and knock this off right now, though, before we put it in the room, because we know that pressure is being expressed in psi. And so we want to convert that to feet. And hopefully in everybody's short-term memory is that formula that we're going to use, and that is we're going to multiply that times 2.31. And so when we do that, obviously now we come up with 139 feet. So we're going to drop that 139 into our pressure room. I think this is where I want to just take pause here, and I want to explain to you, why is that 2.31? Why is that the number? And here's why it is. If when converting pressure to feet, basically you take the pressure times 2.31. Here's why that is. If you were to take a 1 square inch mark and put it on a table, all right, just 1 square inch. So you've got this 1 square inch mark on a table. And then on top of that 1 square inch mark, you're going to put a 1 square inch column, and it's going to be 3 feet tall, all right? So we're going to put a big old column down on top of that 1 square inch at the bottom. It's 3 feet tall. So the question now becomes, how much water do we have to pour into that column to create 1 pound of pressure at the bottom and on that 1 square inch? How much water do we have to pour into that column to get 1 psi? And the answer is on the screen, right? It's 2.31 feet of water. That's how much we have to put in that 1 inch column to get 1 psi. You'd have to double that water to get 2 psi, so on and so forth. But that's where that number comes from, 2.31. All right, let's move along with this next sizing job. Next question is, sir, do you have any elevation? Do you got any lift? I mean, what have we got going on there? He says, oh, yeah, a little bit of each. I got 10 feet of lift, and I've got, 15 feet of elevation. Again, these numbers would be whatever they are, but we know what to do with them. We're going to put the 10 feet in the lift room, and we're going to put the 15 feet back in the elevation room. Now, obviously, we're back down to that friction loss again, all right? Well, the 3 things we need to know is pipe size, length of pipe, and flow rate. Well, the guy says he's going to continue to run 1.5-inch pipe. This time, on the other hand, he's got 300 feet of it. So again, when you come down the left-hand column there, you're not going to find 24, obviously, because it becomes in increments of 5. So I go to the next highest one, 25, close enough, and put a finger there. And I scroll across the top, and I'm finding that pipe size again, which is 1.5-inch. I come over from 25. I come down from 1.5-inch. I intersect in a box. And again, when I look at that, I'm seeing 4 feet. And I know you're seeing 3 point something, but you know, to make the math easy, I'm just going to call that 4 feet in my own mind. But again, that 4 feet is per 100 feet of pipe. And the guy's telling me he's got 300. So now I take that 4. I think you know what we need to do with it. We need to multiply that times 3, and that gives us the 12 feet that we put in our house to complete the house. And so again, we add those numbers up. This time I'm coming up with 176 feet, but I can't emphasize enough, this is really the two numbers that we as pump companies have been trying to teach in pump sizing for literally decades and decades. But we talk in a language like total dynamic head and suction lift, and people got confused about that. And if you're not sizing and selling pumps every day, it could become easy to be confused. But with this house, you build this house, you add up the feet, and you've got your water in the chimney up there. So here we go, 176 feet. Well, just like before, I'm going to be just where I was just shy of that 150. I'm going to be just above the 175. And 24 gallon a minute, well, that's going to be, you know, down here between, you know, dead center is 25, so maybe just shy of dead center for 24 gallon a minute. But when I bring these two points together, voila, once again, there's a line that runs right through that intersection, and it makes it very easy to choose that pump. So in this case, because he wanted a little higher pressure, we're going to offer him a 2-horse 3-stage. Now, I said beginning on this presentation probably wouldn't last much more than 45 or 50 minutes, but I do have a closing comment that I want to make in using the house of resistance, all right? I've had contractors and distributors, you know, they get excited. They can't wait to go home and size up a pump. And the first time they size a pump up, they end up, you know, somewhere where I've got these red circles. And it's like, well, now wait, time out. That guy from Indiana that was talking to us about this the other day, every time he went to one of these doggone charts, he had a line run through his intersection. Well, folks, that was by design. Really, that was by design. And that's more the exception to the rule, quite frankly. What you're seeing up on the screen is more the rule, all right? You kind of end up out here in no man's land somewhere, all right? Let's just talk about that for a minute, since that more frequently than not is where you're going to land, all right? So let's just suppose that little red circle that's out there in the middle of that performance curve is where you landed, and, you know, there's no line running through that circle. And so the question is, you know, what do you do? Well, there's a couple of things I can tell you right off the bat based on where you did land, where that red circle's at. Tells me that you want about 150 feet is what ended up in your house, right? Otherwise, you wouldn't be there. So you're at 150 feet, and then if I come straight down from that circle, I'm thinking, all right, you're wanting about, what, 24, 25 gallon a minute at that 150 feet, all right? But there's no pump that's going to give you 24 or 25 gallon a minute at 150 feet because there's no line running through there. But there are some lines that cross that 150. Let's look at a couple. Just move to the left. All right, move to the left. Right there's a line that crosses the 150. All right, right there. But if you want to know, if you select that pump there, it will overcome the resistance. It will deliver water to your zone, but it's only going to deliver you about 15 gallon a minute. All right, about 15 gallon a minute. Now there's another line that crosses that 150, and it's to the right of your target point. All right, that's to the right of it, where I've got the red arrow. That'll take care of your resistance. But that particular pump, when it's going to be up and running, is going to give you a little more water than what you're asking for. You're wanting 25 gallon a minute, that pump's going to give you 30. So when you look at your target of 150 feet, and 25 gallon a minute, there are two choices. Now, the 150 and the 15 gallon a minute, or the 150 and the 30 gallon a minute. And obviously, the obvious choice would be to take the 30 gallon per minute so that you're not starving any of the zones. So that's how you work a pump curve. But hopefully this house of resistance just kind of puts this whole pump sizing in a little different light for you. Again, there's some handouts attached. There's a survey attached if you feel kind enough to send those back in and download the attachment. But with this, I believe that this is the end of the presentation. So I wish everybody safety, travel safe, and hope to talk to you all again next week. Thank you very much. This web conference is now concluded.